Well, good morning, everybody. Robert Phoenix here with some technical difficulties on the side of things. Get the hair straight. Come on, man, get it together. Today should be a baseball cap kind of day. What's going on? What's happening out there? I've been working my ass off the last 24 hours. Hold on a second. There we go. I've been working my ass off for the last 24 hours, 40. The last few days have been, very heavy with the workload scene. It's like I need a stylist. Okay, we'll go with the slightly exposed middle-aged chest hair look today. Um, so it's been a pretty intense run here, just in terms of dealing with people, reading, scheduling, all the stuff that one has to do in order to keep a business running. Well, this morning, we're going to be talking more about happening out there in Kavanaugh land. This whole thing has become just a complete and utter charade, and it's become a charade at the highest level. So, what we have here is what I was talking about yesterday, which is an organized, semi-organized conflict to determine what the organizing principle is and will be. Now, as long as Donald Trump is in office, and unless he taps out somewhere between now and 2022, can you imagine we've got theoretically 2 more years of Donald Trump? And I'm not saying that in a disparaging way, by the way. But I'm not sure that the country can hold up with the same amount of invective, anger, frustration, resentment. Of course, it probably won't, because we're going to be going through the Saturn Pluto conjunction, which takes place in January of 2020, which is a pretty big deal, to be honest with you. And that's right around we would have the beginning, right? So the next election would be in 2020. Theoretically, it would be in November of 2020. So that entire year, we're going to have that dance with Saturn and Pluto, and also the South Node, all in Capricorn, and it's going to be a very critical year for. And I'm not saying anything you don't already know, but it's going to be a very, very critical year. So 2019 is the gateway year. I believe 2019 is the year that is the sort of the last year that we remember, like how things were at one point in time. That's my sense about 2019. In 2020, we're having a whole new discussion, a whole new conversation about where things are, where the world is going, not just the United States, but the entire world. And there's a big world out there. Lynn sent me an email about a ship, a Chinese ship. It's a hospital ship off the coast of Panama, where she lives. Now, the Chinese could be, getting ready to scoop up some organs, which is what they're really good at. But they could also be positioning that ship in that area so that they can either present an image and a kind of a soft force of goodwill, or they could have that ship there because perhaps there might be some military confrontation or conflagration, and they need that ship in that area. But the bottom line is that, and I've talked about this before, is China is making significant global inroads all across the planet. They've taken the money that they've been making hand over fist with manufacturing, and they've been basically building out infrastructure around the planet. And it started in Africa back in the early 2000s when China got into places like the Congo and these areas in Central Africa where they started to get the rare earth minerals, and they've just been building from that point forward. So if you wanted to buy a cell phone, or you have to have some of the rare earth minerals in there so that your cell phone can actually work. And China became a big dealer in the rare earth mineral market. The other thing that China is doing, obviously, is it's beginning to not only build out its infrastructure around the world, but it's beginning to export what's called their social credit system. Apparently, Apple is starting to look at this for their iPhones. So if you have an iPhone out there and you are texting and calling and perhaps doing web searches, perhaps commenting on websites, that Apple is taking your information and they're creating a social credit grade for you. And the social credit is a really important aspect for the world that's moving forward. The social credit will determine if you're a good boy or a good girl. And as a result, you'll be able to have social privileges. Those privileges being to travel, those privileges being to uh, work, because that will be one of the determining factors when you apply for a job. They'll look at your social credit score. And if you have a poor social credit score, you will not qualify for a job. So this is all about incentivizing people by modifying their behavior. And this is what's happening at a larger scale with Kavanaugh, hashtag Me Too, and the psychological operation that hashtag Me Too is, because it is also about behavior modification. And when I say that, and what I mean by that, that we look around and we see these social markers, and the social markers are in our face every day. And there's a new one today. Padma Lakshmi breaks silence about past rape. In a deeply personal essay, Padma Lakshmi says she can relate to Christine Blasey Ford's sexual assault allegation. Now, I've likened this to a couple of different things. I've likened this to the location of the intermediate species, which is the whole Darwinian effect. They've never ever been able to find the intermediary species. So every now and then they'll come up with some weird bone or some weird find, and they'll say, "Well, we're one step closer to being able to put together the final pieces, which will fully explain Darwin's theory of evolution." And they never do, because they never will, because Darwin's theory of evolution is flawed. Even Darwin knew that. Some of the best minds of the 20th century have known that. I believe Niels Bohr, the quantum physicist, actually knew it. This guy's a Nobel Prize winner, and he's like shooting down Darwin and excommunicado, baby. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. I mean, if the robot Stephen Hawking had been alive and he'd shot down Darwin, I guess what would happen? What would happen if Noel deGrasse Tyson shot down Darwin? Because he's probably the sort of the biggest quote unquote scientific celebrity. How do you think the world would deal with that? That'd be interesting, wouldn't it? He never will, though. But this is what happens with the hashtag Me Too movement, because now this article, which is front and center, I read Yahoo homepage a lot, and I read it because I want to know what's going on with the mainstream. I want to know what programming is taking place with the mainstream, what they're trying to do with getting into people's heads and turning the screws. I think it's a very, very important kind of cross section. Briefly, you don't want to spend too much time there. You have to take a shower after you spend too much time on Yahoo. But here's the big story, the headline story about Padma Lakshmi. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to create a field of sympathy for Christine Blasey Ford, and it's like they're bringing the numbers together. They're coalescing the numbers so that the numbers from a sort of mass perspective, but also the numbers from an emotional perspective are there to buttress her claims, even though she's foggy about what she's gone through. And she won't necessarily go to Washington to testify. She wants the FBI to get in. Of course, the FBI is not going to do it. This is a Supreme Court justice. This would be setting a precedent for a Supreme Court justice nominee. It's not going to happen. We're going to have the vote on Friday, and I expect Brett Kavanaugh to be voted in. That's what I expect. Now, I could be completely wrong. Tomorrow, when I do the show, I'm going to fire up a chart for Friday, and I'm going to try to piece some things together so that I may have a more informed look from an astrological perspective. My gut says that he'll be passed through, and the reason why is because of his connection with Anthony Kennedy. Anthony Kennedy has been on the Supreme Court for a very long time. He has quite a few allies that are in Washington, D.C., people that he's worked with, people that he's judged for, people who have clerked for him. So there's a pretty deep network of Kennedy supporters, and Kavanaugh is in that camp as being a Kennedy supporter. So I think he'll get, passed through, and that's when the fun will start. That's when the fun will start. If he gets through, I think all hell is going to break loose. You're going to see people that are going to desecrate. I mean, this is where we are now. We're in a full-on, full-scale, 24/7 revolutionary cycle, which started the day after the election. Keep in mind that we're coming up on the 101st anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. And for the last 2 years, we have been on full blast with propaganda, attacks, accusations. It has been a 24/7 full spectrum assault on the country, the people, governance. And by the way, this has nothing to do with me with standing up for Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump is a very flawed individual. I think he's a flawed president. However, based on his chart, I saw what he was going to do, and he's doing what his chart says he's going to do. He is a conductor and orchestrator of chaos. And even though he's been isolated inside of his own cabinet, and that's going to become increasingly more prevalent the further we go into this year with the Saturn opposition in his chart. Don't underestimate Donald Trump, and don't underestimate his power and connections with people. Don't underestimate those connections, because unless his buddies over in the Holy Land throw him under the bus, he has cultivated a lot of credibility and cultivated a lot of, that's what I'm looking for, cachet with his pals in the Holy Land. And if you know anything about what they do in places like Tel Aviv, where they have these massive tech centers, we also have the Talpiot program and Project 6800. I mean, it's like really sophisticated technological stuff, listening, data gathering, surveillance, security. I mean, it's become the hub of the world, and they're the spine of the NSA and the CIA, and they've got dirt on everybody and everything. Probably listening right now to this very same broadcast. That said, that's a very powerful ally to have, believe it or not. So even though Trump gets pushed around a lot by the media, and he certainly has become pilloried at every single turn, and in some ways, I'm not always. In some ways, I think he probably earns some of it every now and then. Okay, I mean, let's just say his style is a bit brusque. It's not my style, but I understand it. I totally understand it. So don't underestimate him. There's still, and he is a Leo rising, and he is Mars and Leo uh, in the first house on the ascendant. It's actually really on the ascendant, but on the first house. So he still has a few teeth left in his grill, believe it or not. So this is going to be interesting how this plays out, but do not expect this to die down, because every time now there is a major or even a minor election or a minor appointment, it's going to be full on. It's going to be totally full on. Look at what happened with Roy Moore down in Arkansas, right? Was it Arkansas? Alabama. My bad, Alabama. Look what happened with Roy Moore in Alabama. They came out of the woodworks. Where are those women now? Well, they took their money and they moved on. They got what they needed to get. Have you noticed that nobody else has come out and said, Roy Moore did this to me? There were no more women? No. What do you think will happen if by chance Brett Kavanaugh is not voted in? Well, there's going to be chaos. I'm telling you right now. There's going to be chaos on one side or there's going to be chaos on the other side. It doesn't really matter. There's going to be chaos in the air. So if Brett Kavanaugh is not voted in, then there will be a round of applause, huzzahs, dilly-dillies, and there will be no more accusers coming forward. I guarantee you that. No more accusers coming forward. Won't be happening. Not happening. Because they will have achieved their goal, which is to stop Brett Kavanaugh in his tracks. And again, I'm not carrying water for Brett Kavanaugh. The guy knows where the body is buried with Vince Foster. And I mean, what really it speaks to is the depth of the flawed system in which we live. And I kind of got into this a little bit yesterday. If you look at the system, in order to gain a position of power, and power in this instance means that you can either influence, judge, or rule over another or a group of others, a single individual or a body of people. That is power. That is to me, that is the definition of power, because in that instance, you get to perform the function of like a secondary god. If you have the power of somebody's life, you can sentence them to X amount of years, or you can sentence them to death. That's a clear definition of power. Nobody else gets that power. There are other versions of that kind of power in lesser manifestations. So in order to get that kind of power in our society, right? And by the way, the acquisition of power is a lifelong and transgenerational quest and project. Once a generation gets its or family gets its hooks into power, they do not let go. Their goal is to then raise their children so their children can be the next power generation, and so on and so on and so on. And then what they do is they begin to intermarry into other families that also have power. And through those marriages, there's the accrual of power, transgenerational power. This is what happens. This is how the game is played. Now, once you're in that niche, and we're seeing this very, very clearly, and there are versions of this, like what we're seeing under the microscope is WASP power. That's what we're seeing. There are different versions of power. If we wanted to, we could find a microscope of Jewish power. If we wanted to, we could find a microscope of Chinese power. There's even variations with black power. They're different though. They are different models. So what we're seeing is one model that we're having this sort of bird's eye view into. And what do we see? We see a bunch of rich, privileged kids from the 1980s who like to get smashed and screw. It's like what all kids get to do or like to do or think they like to do, theoretically, only with better booze, nicer homes, perhaps a few points up on the IQ scale, and more privilege if and when they're ever caught. This is kind of what we're having, this X-ray vision into that world. So in order to get into these positions of power, well, you have to be part of the power network or the power grid. And this is what we're seeing. We're seeing the power grid kind of being ripped away before our very eyes. Now, not everybody's like that, but it's very, very hard to find somebody who is absolutely squeaky fucking clean. You just don't find that. And if you do, I guarantee you they're probably not going to Washington, D.C., because their shorts are going to be soiled very, very quickly. That's a brutal place. Washington, D.C. is an asphalt jungle. Of course, there's no trash on the ground for the most part. It's very clean, 24/7 surveillance. Anyway, so in order to play that game, you better nut up, and you really should probably have a lot of very powerful allies and friends, and it doesn't hurt to have dirt on people. That's the name of the game. Now, is Brett Kavanaugh morally fit to become a Supreme Court justice? Well, I'm sure if I wanted to, I could go down through the list of Supreme Court justices throughout history, and I could probably pick off at least half a dozen who were less than morally fit to be a Supreme Court justice. I'm really hoping that at some point, and I mean this in all sincerity, I really believe that the one place that AI could actually make a difference is in adjudication. I really feel like AI could be a serious player in determining how these things go. I know it sounds crazy, but I think it's the only way you can get out of activist judges. And how do you, could you imagine if an AI was being elected to the Supreme Court? It'd be kind of like what happened with Obama before he became president. People are looking around and, who is this guy? Where did he come from? Where did he come from? Do we have any dirt on him? No, he doesn't even really exist. Having an AI, like you look around, wow, where did this AI come from? Who's the creator? What were their preferences? That's where they'd go. Who created the AI? Oh, they're not morally fit. They're not morally sound. Did you know that they have an anime fetish and they've created this AI? I mean, this whole thing is absolutely, utterly bizarre. The other thing that's happening with Kavanaugh, and it's been going on for a while now, and this is the humiliation of the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male. And this is in some ways in alignment with Anthony Bourdain, even though Bourdain was Jewish on his mother's side and French. So he's not quite sort of in that camper category, but he is. And Bourdain became the Wicker Man. And Asia Argento, the witch, lit the flame, and up goes Tony. Tony goes up in smoke. We've been seeing this with Trump. Trump is another version of the Wicker Man. And Brett Kavanaugh is another version of the Wicker Man. So what we see here is this pattern. And we have to ask ourselves, is the pattern something that's been sought out, chosen, and has an agenda associated with it? My answer to that would be yes. Yes. And yes with an asterisk. But there's another pattern kind of going on here at maybe a slightly bit of a higher level, which is the balancing of this masculine and feminine energy. But I feel like there's an overreach. There's kind of this metastasization of what's taking place on the scale of that balancing. And can we? It's almost like there's an overcorrection in some ways. You ever have a recipe and you say to yourself, well, it needs more of this, more of this, more of this, more of this, and the next thing you know, you get into the more and you taste, you've kind of fucked the whole thing up, and it's like, man, I added too much of this one. There's an overcorrection in the recipe, and I feel like we're having an overcorrection in the system. Will that overcorrection result in some kind of backlash and heavy duty reaction coming from the other side? Quite possibly, because that's the way these things work. It's one of the laws of nature. But I also feel like there's been a conscious and concerted effort to recreate the Wicker Man over and over and over again. And Brett Kavanaugh is the latest version of the Wicker Man. Anytime now a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male is going to be in a position of power, or is uh, in the process of becoming a part of a system or group where he will hold a lot of power, there will be intense scrutiny on this person. And the scrutiny will be about his past and what he's done or didn't do. And this brings us up into a very complex realm of judgment and reckoning. Because I do feel as if we are living in a time of reckoning, and these acts are symbolic of the reckoning that we were all going to go through. And nobody, by the way, is immune to the reckoning. And I don't care if you've got one set of chromosomes or the other, we're all in the reckoning process together. Nobody is immune. And that is the truth. But to focus one group or one individual and to make them the symbol or the focal point of the reckoning will only be able to last so long, because this is a much, much bigger process. However, that said, the world is not our place for judgment. Being judged by the world and having a personal reckoning, which we're all going through, are two separate things. We are judged accordingly by our Creator and the Most High and the divine spirit within. This is where the judgment ultimately takes place. And it has very little to do with the world, even though the world would like to present itself as the court of celestial and divine proclamation. It is not. It is not. What it is it's a shit show theater. And Brett Kavanaugh, is now having to debase himself and to tell the rest of the world that he was a virgin, that there was no way that he could have had sex with these young women because he was a virgin and was a virgin into college. That's a debasement. That's an absolute and utter debasement. Now, could this have to do with the fact that perhaps in another area of Brett Kavanaugh's life that he's lying and he may be holding something that is along the lines of Vince Foster? Perhaps. And perhaps this is how this is getting played out in some ways. See, this would be the process of reckoning for him. And one of the things that somebody brought up on the questions on the live stream from a couple days ago, they brought up this idea that there has to be a healing, like we don't have a place for the healing or for the emotions to come out. I believe this was in reference to #MeToo. Well, what is the goal here? What is the stated goal? Like when Black Lives Matter was really pumping and thumping, what was the stated goal? Well, the stated goal, when you got right down to it, the stated goal was reparations, redistribution of economy, and moving people out of their homes so other people who have homes that are less than livable according to the social standard can then move in. I mean, these were actual stated aims and goals that they had. At least they had stated aims and goals. I don't know what the stated aims and goals are here. They're very nebulous. They're very, very nebulous. What is it? Should we have a tribunal process? Is this what? Maybe this should be the stated goal of hashtag Me Too, is to come up with a list of names and have kind of a Nuremberg trial for men, and put every single man on trial, man by man by man, and we could run this for the next 30 years, right? And we'd start with people at the top of the food chain and just work their way down. Maybe this could be one of the. There are no stated goals here. There are no stated goals about, these things have happened and we really love men. We have children with men, and we're working hard to get over some of these things that have happened to us. So, we'd like to figure out a way to build a bridge so that we can come back together as men and women on this planet. There's none of that. There's none of that. It's really just another high level divide and conquer technique. That's all it is. It's been weaponized. I am sympathetic to the plight of women who have been abused or raped. I have had many clients where I have had to work with them and get through stuff with them. I get it. I've been on the front lines of seeing some of the stuff in a big way. So I get it. It's real. There are men who have also been sexually abused. One of the things we don't talk about are all these kids in Pennsylvania who've been sexually abused and molested by the Catholic Church and priests inside the Catholic Church. This is really, again, if we're trying to balance this thing out, let's bring that out into the open. Let's have more discussion about that, because there are thousands and thousands of young men, and I wouldn't say women, it's mostly boys, who have been taken advantage of by priests. It shows up, gets some play in the press, and goes away. Boom, done. We're no longer talking about it. They make a movie in Hollywood about it, Spotlight. It gets a few Oscars, done. So in actuality, this is what's taking place. And Brett Kavanaugh is having to go through a form of a reckoning, a personal reckoning. And it's part of the society now that we live in. And I'm not necessarily a fan of it, to be quite honest with you. I was watching Ted Cruz at a Washington restaurant. I think it was last night or the night before, where people came up to him in a restaurant and they started harassing him because he knows Brett Kavanaugh. They're friends. And he and his wife had to leave. I don't care what you think of Ted Cruz. I don't respect that kind of behavior, unless, of course, the tables are turned. In which case, both sides can then go out and be like a pack of wolves, have a mob mentality, and harass whoever they want to harass. And in which case, we've descended into a third world nation where people have absolutely zero civility. Zero. None. And at that point, the social fabric and the social lubricant that makes all the pistons and the gears and everything move in in a semblance of order, it breaks down, it runs out. The gears start crunching, the engine smokes, and the country's on the side of the road. Now, if you have a revolutionary mindset, you say, well, this is great. It's all fair, right? Public. It's public. Freedom to assemble. Well, it was inside of a private restaurant. Wasn't out on the sidewalk. Once Ted Cruz gets out on that sidewalk, he's fair game. Inside the restaurant, that is private property. And restaurateurs who allow this to take place should be deeply scrutinized. And I would say they should not be allowed. They should be avoided at all costs. And that goes for the left and the right. I'm sorry. There are just certain things that you should be able to have. Even if you're a freaking war criminal, and trust me, there are plenty of war criminals that never get hassled and harassed. Like nobody's ever up in Henry Kissinger's grill. Nobody's ever up in Donald Rumsfeld's grill. They're not hanging out somewhere in New Mexico or Colorado or wherever Rummy's living these days. You know it's not Washington. He doesn't want any part of that shit. I believe people should have the right to have their experience in a private location without being harassed. You get out on the street, that's a whole other deal. You better be prepared for that. And if I was Ted Cruz, I'd start to have bodyguards. If I was anybody in the public office, I would start to have bodyguards, especially in Washington. I don't care if you're on the left or on the right. You should probably have bodyguards at this point. It was ugly. It's an ugly situation. They started chanting and shouting inside of the restaurant. I sound like the guy who says, get off the lawn. But I believe in decency, right? I believe that people should be able to have the opportunity to sit down and have a meal. Even the criminal war fuck like Dick Cheney. Sit down and have your meal in the restaurant. You get out of the restaurant and you're on the street. It's a whole other deal. But we're descending into this third world level of demagoguery and mob mentality, and it's not good. It's not good. It's not good. It doesn't allow us to have civility and the ability to have discourse. At the end of the day, what does it matter? What does it mean? I guarantee you, 2 years from now, we're going to be having a very, very different discussion. Remember 2.5 years ago, we were talking about people like Michael Brown and Freddie Gray. We're not talking about them anymore. We're not talking about what's happening in the inner cities or cops shooting young black males. We're not talking about that. Trump, 2.5 years ago, was banging his fist against radical Islam. Radical Islam this, radical Islam that. Are we talking about that anymore? No. So even on the left and even on the right, we're not talking about these things because they're no longer politically expedient. This is the most politically expedient thing we're talking about now. In 2 years from now, we'll be talking about something different. So when we get into this theater, it is a plane really of illusion, and it is a plane of transient experience that taps into our emotional body. This is what's happening. But that said, it does have an impact on the collective. And it's very, very difficult not to get drawn in because there's this feeling that people are being agitated, people are being stirred, people are being poked. And that feeling actually is quite real, to be honest with you. So, how do we deal with it? Well, you look at it, you disassemble it, you don't give it as much power as you possibly can or would. You look for a higher level or a higher meaning, and then you move on. You move on to something else. This is what we have to do. And this is kind of the mind lock and the Gordian knot for the country and in many ways the world. And again, when we move into January of 2020, we're going to see where all this is headed. In fact, probably even before that. So I'm supposed to be working with Steve and Chris on the third installment of John D. And I think that's coming up on Friday, the last Friday of the month. So we'll be doing that on Friday. But I'll also probably take about an hour just to track what's going on with the whole Kavanaugh thing and do that in real time because it's going to be worth watching. The aftermath of the Kavanaugh thing on either side is going to tilt. It's going to tilt the level of discourse and civility yet again. And there are going to be no winners. Trust me, if Kavanaugh is elected, you think the left is just going to lay down and say, oh, gee, you fought a good one. You hung in there. You debased yourself. Congratulations. You deserve to be on the Supreme Court. Good job. Okay. We gave it our best shot. We'll see you guys a couple weeks before the midterms. You think that's where they're going to go? They're going to turn it up to 11 on the spinal tap volume scale, right? They're going to go to 11. That's what they're going to do. What happens if he doesn't pass confirmation? What do you think the right is going to do? Well, the right probably won't do as much because the people on the right, they hold things in. That's what the people on the right do. They hold things in. See, Alex Jones was their pressure valve, pressure relief, right? But he's not there anymore. So who does it fall to after that? Rush Limbaugh? Does he become the pressure release? Right? Or Sean Hannity? You know, maybe a little Glenn Beck. The right holds things in. That at some point, they can only hold in so much. And then after that, you'll see a water heater explosion on that side. So Friday's a big day. It's a very big day. And tomorrow I'll break out the chart for Friday. We'll look at it and we'll look at what's going on with the latest in the Kavanaugh nonsense as the lives, the salacious lives of blue bloods, fast times at the Georgetown Academy and in Blassie School. Was it Holton Arms? Fast times at Holton Arms. By the way, I downloaded the yearbook. I downloaded Blassie's yearbook. I was looking at the pictures. A lot of alcohol. Very liberal school. Very, very liberal school. Let's put it that way. Doesn't surprise me. All right, I'm out of here. Let me check in with the chat room. I haven't checked in with you guys here. This is what's going on in chat land. Do we have any chatters? Let's see. That was disgusting. Where was the manager of the restaurant? Rummy is reptilian. Yeah, he made it live. There's White Wolf. Hello. It's not conservative libertarians mobbing around creating chaos. We need to name them. They're communist Marxists. But you're right. This is look. I don't agree with it. I don't abide by it. The dude doesn't abide by getting into these restaurants and harassing these people. I think we have to have a form of civility in the society, or else we descend into chaos and absolute pure anarchy, and not the good version of anarchy, by the way. That's what they do. Turn up the heat. Murder rate on the rise. What can people do realistically to handle it? You answer this as I typed. The resistance equals communist revolution. Of course they are. Of course they are. That's the dirty little secret, right? That the CPSU and the Communist Party, it's never really gone away. There's this heartthrob love affair with communism because it represents energy, right? Or communism, there's always a sense of energy, because there's always something to rebel against. There's always something to latch onto. There's always some social plank in the social order that needs to be addressed or attacked. And it's like a shot of adrenaline, low-hanging fruit, and allows people to move outside of sort of the Saturnian confines of their upbringing and the established order in their lives. It is a conflict that is inherent in Chiron, which is the way station or the midpoint between Saturn and Uranus. And we're always trying to balance this aspect of order and destruction, order and chaos in our lives. This is what happens. And there's a group of people who love chaos. They're into chaos. That's their thing. They thrive on chaos. And the revolution is always in a constant state. There's never any end point to the revolution. And ultimately, it just wears people out, grinds people down. And I have clients who lived in communist bloc countries. And let me tell you, they're really good people, but there are parts of them that are really screwed up, and they'll even admit it. And it's the byproduct of what they experienced. growing up in these extremely depressed and heavy-handed systems where choices were made for you, your careers were pretty much chosen for you, and there was an absolute oppressive and depressive pall that was cast over the entire population with no possibility of redemption except for maybe cheap potato vodka. Okay. So it is not a wonderful panacea for any kind of enlightenment. Hollywood loves it. Hollywood loves communism, socialism, and is connected into Luciferianism. I'm sorry, they're there. They're one and the same. You go back, you look at the early symbols and early propaganda for the Bolsheviks. It's like laden with occult symbolism. You know, and these guys who ran that revolution came out of New York City, funded by the Rothschilds. Well, Americans love that shit, man. And at a high level, it was the American corporate interests that wanted to get into Russia and control their assets. They wanted to be involved in manufacturing and sell the Russians all kinds of crap that they didn't want the Russians to be self-defined and self-governed and develop industrially on their own. No, they didn't want it. So they gladly threw down with the amount of money that was needed to, pull off the Bolshevik Revolution. And there were at least 2 or 3 times where Russia could have starved to death. And of course, the Americans stepped in and fed them. I mean, really, if we were at war with them, why would you even feed them? You fed them because you wanted to be involved in their manufacturing processes and control this left right dialectic. Anyway, what do we have here? That's what they do, turn up the heat. Okay, I read that. Somebody asks, and women have been abusers too. Yes, Joe, that's true. Is this resistance and growing conservative consciousness a sample or indication of what's to come with Uranus and Taurus? No, I wouldn't say so. We saw that with Uranus and Aries. We saw the individual being electrified and deciding that they wanted to have their own list of demands. Every single group during Uranus and Aries, I can just name the groups, right? You had on the right, you had sort of the MAGA group. They popped up like a mushroom during Uranus and Aries. You had Black Lives Matter. You had LGBTQD. You had all these people, right? All these groups, all these individuals with Uranus and Aries. It was a blood rush to the head. And everybody's like, we fucking matter. We matter. We matter. With Uranus and Taurus, the destabilization process takes place in economic systems. It takes place with foundational elements because Taurus is a foundational element. It's the second house in astrology. It's a very, very important house, by the way. So when we get into Uranus and Taurus, we're talking about the destabilization of foundational principles. Things like what we just saw, by the way, in that restaurant in Washington, D.C. And look, Ted Cruz is a drip, okay? He's a total drip. I can't stand listening to him. He's another phony rhino. He's not. I wouldn't want to hang out with Ted Cruz at all. But I'm defending Ted Cruz's right to have a fucking dinner in Washington D.C. without a bunch of jackals getting in there. And if I was in that restaurant, even if I was in that restaurant, and these people started chanting about Kavanaugh and Blasey or whatever, I'd be pissed off. I'd be like, fuck you. Now you're into my experience. Now you're into my experience with my dinner. This is the Libra in me talking now. We have lost the ability. We're losing the ability to have decency and rules of discourse. You want to take it out on the street? Take it out on the street. That's a whole nother deal. And like I said, if I was a politician in Hollywood, in Washington, D.C., I'd either start packing or I'd certainly have bodyguards with me. Anything else here? I'm afraid they have gotten away with too much and there's no turning back. Society has certain rules that aren't followed. You're right. I mean, we sound old, don't we? Don't we sound like old farts, old fogies about how good, look, there are just certain things in a civilized world that you fucking do. You just do them. And once those things go away, once the social fabric gets completely torn asunder, we're living in a third world environment, and good luck. Have fun with that, because the future is not great when it comes down to it. Yes. Look, there's something to be said about decency, decorum, and allowing people to have a sense of being able to be in public without being completely harassed, especially in a private place. You know, I remember one time I was on a plane, and that guy Bob Novak was on the plane. And Bob Novak was kind of the conservative tool on those morning talk shows in DC that CBS would run. I think in the morning, Bob Novak was the Capitol Hill Gang. I think that's what it was called. And you'd have these four dudes, doing their thing. And I always found Bob Novak to be pretty annoying. So one time I was on a plane with him. And not only was I on a plane with him, but it was when George Bush lost to Bill Clinton. And I was in Mexico to watch that election. Anyway, I'm out on the curb waiting to get picked up, and there's Bob Novak right next to me. And I had to say to him, because George Bush, of course, at that time was, the big, he was the pitch man for the New World Order. Of course, little did I know at that time, because I wasn't fully aware of the relationship between Bill Clinton and George Bush, that Bill Clinton was involved in the very same thing and would be doing the bidding of the Crown and all the people that are involved in the promotion of the New World Order. So I was there on the curb with Novak, and I said, "Hey, Bob, what about that New World Order?" And he said, "It's over. It's over. New World Order is over." God bless him. God bless him. Anyway, Jasper's here to add a little civility before we get on out of here. I've opened up a bit of a can of worms, but I think that, we have, this guy's always civil right here. He's always civil. Yeah. Jasper should be the goodwill ambassador for the planet. Jasper has never met a person he doesn't love unconditionally. When does the Kali Yuga end, Robert? Can astrology tell us? And it's a big piece. Look, I think when we get into Pluto in Aquarius, that's a big deal. It's a big deal. I don't think the Kali Yuga theoretically ends until we get into Pluto in Aries, because that's a new beginning and a new start. So we're going to have to go through at least 2 more Pluto cycles. So that's about 35 years, 40 years. That would be my estimate, 45 to 50 years. We won't even be able to recognize this place in 45 to 50 years. He is a handsome guy. Hey, listen, don't let the world get you down, okay? For everything that's out there that makes us look like we're sailing on a ship of fools, there are other areas of your life, other elements of your life, other aspects of who you are that can allow you to feel as if you're not only human, but participating in something greater than being human. And that is the goal here, right? Is to understand that we are human and build a bridge from our humanity to our divinity. And don't ever forget that. And I'll leave you with this little aphorism by William Blake from the Proverbs of Hell. Are you ready? Damn braces while bless relaxes. Damn braces while bless relaxes. So blessing to you all on this day. Go forth and share the blessings in whichever way you can. And let's keep on shining the light to the highest degree that's possible. That's what Jasper says. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to say what's possible. We'll be back again tomorrow. Look at the astrology for the Kavanaugh hearings and or the votes, not even just hearings, the vote. Have a great day.